They thought he was just another face in the crowd. They thought his scars and his quiet voice meant he'd be easy to silence. But they didn't see the quiet strength that comes from standing for something no one else will. They didn't know how quickly the world can turn when you push too far. SWAT tossed a disabled vet. 5 minutes later, armed Pentagon escorts arrived. Subscribe to Endless Stories and share this video, because some stands echo louder than any shout. The day had started like any other. Sunlight streaking through the early morning fog. The city's quiet hum a low backdrop to the world waking up. Marcus Hayes stood at the edge of the plaza, the cool concrete steady beneath his feet, his old army jacket pulled tight around his shoulders. The weight of the years pressed in around him, but his head was high, his eyes calm. He was there to speak. Just a few words he'd written down the night before, words he wasn't sure anyone would hear, but they mattered, and that was enough. A small crowd had gathered, neighbors, a few strangers drawn by the soft sound of his voice as he read. No one noticed the black vans that pulled up at the edge of the square, the glint of armored vests in the pale winter sun. Not at first. Marcus kept reading, his voice steady, the words of his speech simple and true. "We stand for those who have no voice," he said. "We remember the promises we made, and the ones that were made to us." Then he heard the click of boots on the pavement. He turned, and the SWAT team was there, black armor, hard eyes, weapons held low but ready. The leader stepped forward, his voice sharp in the quiet morning air. "You need to leave," he said. Marcus's heart thudded in his chest, but he didn't move. "I'm not causing trouble," he said softly. "I'm here to speak." The man's eyes narrowed. "This is unauthorized," he said. "You need to leave. Now." The crowd shifted, a low murmur of unease in the hush. Marcus felt the weight of their eyes, the quiet pulse of something that had nothing to do with fear and everything to do with dignity. "I have a right to be here," he said. His voice was quiet, but it didn't waver. "I have a right to speak." The leader's lip curled, just a fraction. He reached for his radio, his fingers tight around the device. "Non-compliant," he said. "Prepare to engage." Marcus didn't have time to react. A crackle of static, the low thrum of a command, and then pain exploded through him, white-hot and blinding. He felt the shock rip through his body, every muscle seizing in a sudden, violent spasm. He crumpled to the ground, the words he'd meant to say swallowed by the sharp crackle of a taser's charge. The world blurred, the sky tilting above him in a cold, indifferent sweep. He felt the rough bite of the pavement under his cheek, the taste of copper in his mouth. Around him, the crowd gasped, soft cries of protest that didn't rise above the low buzz of the SWAT leader's voice. "Stand down," the leader said. "He's done." Marcus couldn't speak. He couldn't move. But he could hear. He could hear the way the silence settled around them, the way the crowd's fear turned to something else, something sharper, something that didn't have a name, but he felt it all the same. Then there was another sound, a low, steady beat of engines, growing louder with each second. Black SUVs turning the corner, moving with the quiet purpose of something that didn't need to be announced. The SWAT leader turned, his head snapping up, his hand tightening on his radio. Marcus felt hands on his shoulders, lifting him gently from the cold ground. He blinked, the world swimming in and out of focus, and saw the dark uniforms of men who moved with a different kind of authority. They didn't shout. They didn't threaten. They didn't need to. The lead agent knelt beside him, his eyes calm and steady. "You're safe now," he said quietly. "We've got you." Marcus tried to speak, but the words wouldn't come. The agent squeezed his shoulder gently, a silent promise in the firm press of his hand. "Rest," he said. "We'll handle this." In the hush that followed, the SWAT team stepped back, their hard edges blurring in the soft wash of the morning light. The crowd watched, their eyes wide and bright, the quiet weight of the moment settling over them like the hush before a storm. And Marcus knew, even in the fog of pain, that something had shifted. That 5 minutes had changed everything. The man in the suit moved with the calm of someone who had seen the worst the world had to offer, and still carried himself with the quiet weight of purpose. His name was Colonel Davis, though Marcus wouldn't learn that until much later. All he knew in that moment was the steel in the man's eyes and the quiet authority in his voice. "Stand down," Colonel Davis said, his tone low but unyielding. "This man is a veteran. He will not be treated this way." The SWAT leader hesitated, the hand on his radio twitching. "We were following orders," he said. He refused to comply. Colonel Davis's jaw tightened, but his voice didn't rise. "Your orders do not override the law," he said, "and they do not override the debt we owe to those who have served." He turned to Marcus, who was struggling to sit up, the burn of the taser still pulsing in his limbs. Bear, his service dog, was by his side now, the dog's dark eyes locked on him, the gentle press of his head a promise that he wasn't alone. Colonel Davis knelt, one knee pressing into the cold pavement, his hand resting lightly on Marcus's shoulder. "Easy," he said, his voice gentle now. "We've got you." Marcus managed a breath, his voice a ragged whisper. Why are you here?" Colonel Davis's eyes softened, though the steel in them never wavered. "Because the Pentagon doesn't forget its own," he said. "And because no one stands alone, not while I'm here." Behind him, the SUVs idled in a quiet line, the black windows reflecting the cold light of the morning. Armed escorts stood in a loose circle around the crowd, their faces calm, their movements sure. They didn't shout. They didn't threaten. They didn't need to. The SWAT leader took a step back, his shoulders stiff with the weight of a command he couldn't defy. "This wasn't my decision," he said, his voice low. Colonel Davis didn't look at him. His gaze stayed on Marcus, his hand still steady on his shoulder. "I know," he said, "but you're done here." He rose slowly, his eyes sweeping over the small crowd that had gathered, their faces a quiet tapestry of fear and disbelief and something else, something stronger. "You are witnesses," he said, his voice calm but carrying. "Remember this moment. Remember what it looks like when someone tries to break a man who has already given everything." The words fell into the silence like a promise, a quiet vow that no one would forget. Marcus let out a shaky breath, his eyes closing for a moment as the pain ebbed, replaced by the soft warmth of the sun on his face. When he opened them again, he saw the quiet strength in the men who had come for him, the calm in their eyes, the quiet way they stood. Colonel Davis extended a hand, his expression firm. "Can you walk?" he asked. Marcus nodded, though his legs still trembled. He reached up, his hand finding the strength he'd thought he'd lost in the soft press of the colonel's fingers around his own. "I've got you," Colonel Davis said softly. "Let's go home." And in that moment, with the hush of the crowd around them and the quiet promise in the colonel's voice, Marcus knew he was no longer alone. Marcus leaned into Colonel Davis's steady grasp as they moved away from the crowd, Bear close by his side. The cold air stung his lungs, but with each step, the dull ache in his muscles seemed to fade, replaced by something quieter and stronger. The surety of the men who had come for him. The Pentagon Escort was a quiet storm. No loud commands, no harsh orders. Just the calm precision of people who knew how to stand without needing to shout. Their presence filled the plaza, a quiet shield that left no room for doubt. One of the men stepped forward, his voice low and steady. "Sir," he said to Colonel Davis, "we've secured the perimeter. Do you want us to handle the crowd?" Colonel Davis shook his head, his gaze sweeping over the people who still watched, their faces a mixture of shock and a quiet, growing respect. "No," he said softly. "Let them see. Let them remember." Marcus's head was still spinning, but the simple weight of those words, "let them remember," settled into his chest like a quiet vow. He looked back at the crowd, at the way some of them nodded, their eyes meeting his with something more than curiosity. It was understanding. It was solidarity. Bear nudged his leg, the gentle pressure of the dog's head an anchor that kept him steady. Marcus reached down, his fingers brushing the soft fur, the silent promise between them as steady as the men who walked with him now. They reached the first of the black SUVs, the doors already open. A soldier in dress blues held the door, his face calm, his posture easy. "Sir," he said quietly, offering a hand to help Marcus inside. Marcus paused, his breath catching in the cold air. I'm just a vet," he said, the words slipping out before he could stop them. "I'm not. I didn't ask for this." Colonel Davis turned to him, his expression soft but firm. "No," he said, "you didn't. But sometimes you don't need to ask for respect. Sometimes you just have to stand and let it come to you." The weight of those words settled into Marcus's bones, something solid and real. He let the soldier help him into the SUV, Bear climbing in beside him, the dog's steady breathing a quiet comfort. Colonel Davis climbed in after them, the door closing with a soft click that cut through the cold hush of the morning. The inside of the vehicle was warm, the soft leather seats a sharp contrast to the chill outside. Marcus leaned back, his hand resting on Bear's broad head. He could still feel the ache of the taser's charge, the way it had stolen his breath and left him gasping. But the calm in the faces around him, the quiet strength of the men who had come for him, wrapped around that ache like a bomb. Colonel Davis glanced over at him, his eyes sharp but kind. "You're safe now," he said simply. Marcus managed a small nod, his throat tight. "Thank you," he said softly. Colonel Davis didn't smile. He didn't need to. He just reached over, his hand resting briefly on Marcus's shoulder. "Rest," he said. "We'll take it from here." And as the convoy pulled away from the plaza, the quiet weight of the Pentagon escort filling the morning streets, Marcus let himself believe it. For the first time in a long time, he let himself believe that he wasn't alone. The convoy moved through the city with quiet purpose. Marcus leaned back in the seat, the low hum of the engine and Bear's steady breathing grounding him in the hush of the moment. Outside, the winter sun turned the snow to bright silver, the quiet streets gliding by in a calm, deliberate rhythm. Colonel Davis sat beside him, his expression focused as he spoke softly into a radio. Each clipped exchange was calm, efficient, no panic, no fear. Marcus watched him for a moment, the quiet surety of the man's presence a steady anchor against the churn of his thoughts. "Sir," the driver said quietly, glancing at Colonel Davis in the rearview mirror. "We're 5 minutes out." Colonel Davis nodded, his eyes meeting Marcus's. "We're taking you to a secure location," he said. "Somewhere you can rest. Somewhere safe." Marcus swallowed, his throat tight. "I don't need special treatment," he said, his voice rough with the weight of the words. "I just wanted to stand up. That's all." Colonel Davis's mouth curved in the faintest of smiles, the kind that didn't soften his eyes. "And you did," he said. "You stood when it mattered. That's why we're here." The SUV turned a corner, the convoy flowing behind them like a quiet river of purpose. Marcus caught glimpses of the city he'd known all his life, brick buildings dusted with snow, the faint smell of wood smoke drifting from a row of houses. But it felt different now, as if the quiet weight of the men around him had shifted the world in some small but permanent way. They pulled up in front of an old brick building, the kind that had stood for decades, the kind that had watched the world change and stayed the same. The door was heavy oak, the brass plaque beside it simple and unadorned. Marcus read the words and felt something settle deep in his chest. Veterans Outreach Center. The door opened, and a man in dress blues stepped out to greet them. His hair was silver at the temples, his eyes clear and kind. He looked at Marcus as if he already knew his name, already knew the quiet battle he had fought just by refusing to back down. "Sergeant Hayes," the man said, his voice calm and warm. "I'm Director Lang. Welcome." Marcus shifted in his seat, his hand resting on Bear's head. I'm not sure why I'm here," he said honestly. "I'm just one man." Director Lang's smile was gentle, but his gaze was unwavering. "That's all any of us ever are," he said. "But sometimes, one man standing can remind the rest of us why we're here." Colonel Davis stepped out of the SUV, offering a hand to help Marcus out. Bear jumped down first, his head high, his tail low and calm. Marcus followed, the cold air a shock after the warmth of the vehicle. Inside, the outreach center was quiet, the hush of polished wood and old photographs wrapping around him like a soft blanket. A few men and women sat in chairs along the wall, their conversations low and gentle. They looked up as Marcus entered, their eyes meeting his with something that felt like understanding. Director Lang gestured to a chair near the fire, the glow of the flames painting the room in soft gold. "Sit," he said gently. "Rest." Marcus sank into the chair, the quiet warmth of the fire easing the ache in his bones. Bear lay at his feet, his head resting on his paws, the dog's calm breathing a soft rhythm in the hush. Colonel Davis stood nearby, his posture easy but alert. "You don't have to speak," he said softly. "Not now. Just let us stand for you." Marcus looked at him, his throat tight with the words he couldn't quite say. But he nodded, his hand resting on Bear's head, the weight of the day settling around him in a quiet echo of strength. Because for the first time in a long time, he didn't have to fight alone. The fire crackled softly in the hearth, the warmth of it sinking into Marcus's bones as he sat in the quiet room. Around him, the veteran center carried the hush of memories, the soft rustle of worn uniforms, the low murmur of conversations that spoke of battles fought and promises kept. Director Lang sat across from him, his expression calm and open. "You don't have to share," he said gently. "Not unless you're ready." Marcus shook his head, his hand resting on Bear's head. "I've said enough," he murmured. "I just needed to stand there, to be seen." Lang nodded, his fingers drumming lightly on the arm of his chair. "That's what this place is for," he said softly. "To remember, to stand witness to those moments, even when the rest of the world looks away." A woman in an old Marine jacket offered Marcus a cup of coffee, her hands steady, her smile warm. "It's strong," she said with a wink. "Just the way we like it." Marcus took it with a quiet murmur of thanks, the bitter warmth of it grounding him in the moment. Bear shifted at his feet, the soft thump of his tail a quiet reassurance in the hush. For a while, they sat in silence, the soft glow of the fire painting the room in gentle light. Outside, the snow had begun to fall again, each flake a small miracle of patience and grace. Marcus watched it through the window, his breath slowing, his chest easing with every quiet minute. Then Colonel Davis spoke, his voice low and calm. "You did something today," he said. "You reminded everyone that dignity isn't something you can take away with a taser, that a man's worth isn't measured in how loud he can shout, but in how steady he can stand." Marcus looked down at his hands, the scars that ran across his knuckles pale in the firelight. "I didn't plan to make a statement," he said quietly. "I just couldn't walk away." Lang leaned forward, his eyes steady. "That's what makes it matter," he said. "It's not about the noise. It's about the choice to stand, even when it's easier to sit down." For a long moment, the only sound was the crackle of the fire and the soft, steady rhythm of Bear's breathing. Marcus let out a slow breath, his shoulders easing, the tension of the morning fading into something softer. "I'm tired," he admitted finally, his voice a quiet rasp. "Tired of fighting. Tired of proving I belong." Lang's smile was gentle. "You don't have to prove it anymore," he said. "Not here." Marcus let those words settle into the quiet places of his heart, the soft weight of them as real as the warmth of the fire. He reached down, his hand curling into Bear's fur, the steady thump of the dog's tail a quiet promise in the hush. "Thank you," he said softly, his voice barely more than a breath. Colonel Davis nodded, his expression calm and sure. "You're not alone," he said. "Not today. Not ever." And in that small room, with the fire crackling softly and the snow falling quiet outside, Marcus let himself believe it. For the first time in a long time, he let himself believe he was exactly where he needed to be. The warmth of the fire and the low murmur of voices wove around Marcus like a soft blanket, easing the last of the cold from his bones. He sat quietly, Bear's head resting on his knee, the dog's dark eyes watching him with calm devotion. Each slow breath he took felt like a promise, a quiet echo of the day he'd lived and the strength he'd found in refusing to step back. Director Lang rose, moving to stand by the window. He looked out at the drifting snow, the quiet world beyond the glass. "You know," he said softly, "sometimes the world only learns to listen when someone refuses to leave." Marcus shifted, the weight of those words settling around him. He'd never wanted to be a symbol, had never thought of himself as anything more than a man trying to keep the quiet promises of his own heart. But he knew now that the moment he'd chosen to stay, to stand, even when the world told him to move, that was enough. A soft knock on the door broke the hush, and a young woman in uniform stepped inside. She carried a small box, her expression respectful. "Sir," she said to Colonel Davis, "a delivery just arrived. They said it's for Sergeant Hayes." Marcus's brow furrowed as she approached, the box held carefully in her hands. He took it with a small nod of thanks, the simple weight of it surprising. He set it on the table in front of him and slowly lifted the lid. Inside, nestled in dark velvet, was a small medal, a silver star that gleamed in the soft light of the fire. Marcus's breath caught in his chest, the quiet weight of it more than he'd ever expected. He looked up, his eyes meeting Colonel Davis's steady gaze. I don't understand," he said softly. Colonel Davis's mouth curved in a faint smile. "The Pentagon doesn't forget," he said. "This isn't about orders. It's about honor, and about the stands we take when no one else will." Marcus's fingers brushed over the metal cool and solid against his skin. He didn't feel pride, not in the way some might have expected. What he felt was something deeper, something quieter. The surety that he'd done what he could, that he'd stood where he needed to stand. "I didn't do it for a medal," he said, his voice rough. "I know," Colonel Davis said. "That's what makes it matter." The hush in the room grew deeper, the firelight painting their faces in soft gold. Marcus closed the box slowly, his hand resting on the worn wood of the table. Around him, the quiet understanding in the room felt like a balm, a soft echo of the bond that ran through every man and woman who had ever chosen to stand rather than sit. He looked down at Bear, the dog's calm eyes meeting his own. "We did it, buddy," he said softly. Bear's tail thumped once, the gentle weight of it a quiet promise in the hush. As the sun dipped lower in the winter sky, Marcus realized that what mattered wasn't the medal or the speech he'd tried to give. It was the simple choice to stand. And in that choice, he had found something that no one could ever take away. The hush of the room wrapped around him like a warm blanket, the echo of every quiet stand he'd ever taken singing softly in the quiet of his chest. And in that moment he knew, some fights never end. But some stands, the quiet ones, the steady ones, echo far beyond the moment they're made. The sky outside had deepened into a dusky twilight by the time Marcus rose from his seat. His legs felt steadier now, the warmth of the Veterans Center and the quiet strength of the people around him easing the last of the cold from his bones. Bear stretched beside him, his dark eyes watchful and calm, every movement a quiet promise. Colonel Davis clapped him lightly on the shoulder. "You've done more today than most people ever will," he said quietly. "And you did it without raising your voice." Marcus managed a small, tired smile. "I've never been good at shouting," he said, "but I've always known when to stand." The colonel's mouth twitched into a faint smile. "That's the only skill that matters," he said. "Everything else is just noise." Director Lang stepped forward, his expression thoughtful. "Marcus," he said gently, "you've reminded all of us today that dignity isn't something you can give. It's something you claim by refusing to be moved." Marcus shifted, his gaze dropping to the small box in his hand. The metal still nestled in the dark velvet, the simple weight of it a quiet echo of everything he had stood for. He let out a slow breath. "I didn't do it for this," he said softly. "I just couldn't let them think they could take my voice away." Lang's smile was quiet and kind. "And that," he said, "is what will echo long after today is over." The hush in the room was soft and steady, a shared breath in the warm light of the hearth. Around them, the other veterans nodded, small movements of respect and quiet understanding that spoke louder than any applause. Marcus reached down, his hand resting on Bear's head, the dog's soft fur grounding him in the moment. He felt the echo of every choice he'd ever made, every quiet stand, every breath he'd taken to steady his heart. And he knew, deep in his bones, that what he had done today wasn't just about him. It was about every man and woman who had ever stood when the world said to sit. The door opened then, a young man in uniform stepping inside. He paused, his gaze sweeping the room before settling on Marcus. "Sir," he said, his voice steady, "there's someone here to see you." Marcus blinked, a small frown creasing his brow. "Who?" The young man didn't answer. He just stepped aside, and a figure moved through the doorway. An older man in a dark overcoat, his hair silver at the temples, his shoulders broad and straight. The light from the fire caught the stars on his epaulets, 4 of them shining bright against the deep blue of his uniform. A 4-star general. He stepped forward, his gaze steady, his mouth set in a calm, quiet line. "Sergeant Hayes," he said softly. "I heard what happened." Marcus straightened instinctively, the old reflexes of respect and duty tightening his spine. "Sir," he said, his voice a soft rasp. The general's eyes softened. "At ease, son," he said. "You've done enough standing for one day." He stepped closer, his hand extending, the weight of it a gentle anchor on Marcus's shoulder. "You reminded us," he said quietly, "all of us, that respect isn't something you can demand with a weapon. It's something you earn by refusing to be moved." Marcus's breath caught in his chest, the quiet truth of those words settling over him like a warm blanket. He swallowed, his hand tightening on Bear's head. "Thank you, sir," he said simply. The general's smile was small, but it reached his eyes. "No," he said. "Thank you." And in that quiet moment, in the hush of the room and the warmth of the fire, Marcus felt the last of the cold in his chest melt away, because he knew, with the quiet certainty of a man who had never needed to shout, that he had stood for something that would never fade. The general's hand was firm and steady on Marcus's shoulder, the weight of it a quiet testament to everything he had once believed had been lost. The soft murmur of the room faded for a moment, the flickering fire casting long shadows on the walls, the hush of respect hanging in the air. "I served with men like you," the general said softly, his voice low and even. "Men who didn't need to raise their voice to command respect. Men who knew that standing your ground didn't always look like a battle. It looked like refusing to be moved when someone else said you didn't belong." Marcus swallowed, his eyes holding the general's steady gaze. "I just couldn't let it stand," he said quietly. "Not when they tried to take away everything I fought for." The general nodded, his expression calm but resolute. "And that's why we're here," he said. "To remind them that you don't erase a man's worth with a shock or a threat. You don't silence the voice of someone who has already proven he knows what it means to fight." He reached into his coat, pulling out a small box, the same dark velvet as the one Marcus held in his hand. "I brought this myself," he said softly, "because it matters." Marcus took the box slowly, his fingers brushing over the worn edges. He opened it to see a small pin, a gold eagle clutching arrows, the emblem of command and respect. He looked up, his throat tight. "I don't," he began. "You do," the general said, his voice gentle but unyielding. "Because this isn't just for you. It's for every man and woman who ever stood when the world said sit down. It's for the quiet echo of dignity that can't be stolen or bought." The hush in the room deepened, the other veterans watching with quiet reverence. Marcus let out a slow breath, the warmth of the fire and the steady weight of Bear's head on his knee grounding him in the moment. The general stepped back, his shoulders straight, his eyes calm. "You reminded them," he said simply. "And in doing so, you reminded all of us." For a long moment, no one spoke. Then Colonel Davis stepped forward, his gaze warm and proud. "You didn't just stand today," he said softly. "You showed them what it means to belong. And you did it without ever having to raise your voice." Marcus closed the box gently, the soft click of the latch a quiet promise in the hush. "Thank you," he said, his voice barely more than a breath. The general gave a small nod, his mouth lifting in the faintest of smiles. "The Pentagon doesn't forget its own," he said. And we never will. As he turned to leave, the room seemed to breathe out a long, soft sigh. The weight of the moment settled into the walls. The quiet surety of a promise kept echoing in the hush. Marcus looked down at Bear, the dog's calm eyes meeting his own. He reached down, his fingers brushing the soft fur, and felt the last of the day's cold ease from his chest. Because in that quiet moment he knew he had done more than stand his ground. He had reminded the world that some stands echo long after the noise fades away. The visit from the general had ended as quietly as it began. He left the Veterans Center with the same steady calm he carried in every step, his words lingering in the warm hush of the room like the echo of a promise no one would ever forget. Marcus sat for a long time after he was gone, his fingers brushing over the small box in his lap. The warmth of the fire seemed to reach deeper now, easing the last tremors of the shock he'd carried in his chest. Bear shifted beside him, the dog's calm presence a quiet heartbeat against the hush. Colonel Davis sat nearby, his voice low and steady as he spoke with Director Lang. They spoke in the soft cadence of men who understood the weight of silence, their words weaving through the hush like a gentle current. When they were done, Davis turned to Marcus. "It's time to take you home," he said. "You've done enough for today." Marcus nodded, the weariness in his bones giving way to something softer. A quiet calm that came from knowing he'd stood where he needed to stand. Outside, the sky had shifted to a soft blue-gray. The snow stopped now, the air cold but still. The black SUVs waited at the curb, their engines idling in the hush of the winter evening. As Marcus stepped outside, the crisp air felt clean in his lungs, each breath a quiet promise that he was still here, that he was still standing. Colonel Davis walked beside him, his gaze sweeping the quiet street. "This isn't over," he said softly. "But you've reminded them that some stands can't be erased by noise or fear." Marcus didn't answer. He didn't need to. The words were already there in the quiet between them. The ride home was silent. Bear pressed close to his leg, his dark eyes steady and calm. Marcus looked out the window as the city drifted by, the world wrapped in the quiet glow of streetlights and the hush of a world that had learned, if only for a moment, to listen. When they reached his small apartment, Colonel Davis stepped out first, holding the door as Marcus climbed down. "Rest," he said simply. "Tomorrow is yours to claim." Marcus nodded, his hand resting for a moment on the colonel's arm. "Thank you," he said, the words simple but heavy with the weight of everything they meant. Davis smiled, the faint lines at the corners of his eyes soft in the lamplight. "Any time, Sergeant," he said. "Any time." Inside, the apartment was quiet, the familiar hush of the worn floorboards and the soft sigh of the radiator greeting him like an old friend. Marcus set the small box down on the table, the simple weight of it a quiet echo of the day. He sat on the worn couch, Bear curling up beside him, the dog's steady breathing a balm against the lingering ache in his bones. For a long moment, he just sat there, his hand resting on Bear's head, his breath slow and calm. The world outside was still, the hush of the winter night pressing close. But in that quiet, Marcus felt the steady beat of something stronger than noise or fear. He felt the weight of every stand he'd ever taken, every quiet choice to keep moving forward even when the world said to stop. And in that calm he found something like peace. The next morning dawned with a quiet light, the sky the soft silver of early winter, the world hushed as if it too was listening. Marcus rose slowly, his body still carrying the ache of yesterday's battle, but his heart steady in his chest. Bear moved beside him, the dog's head pressing gently against his knee, his eyes calm and sure. Marcus smiled down at him, his hand resting in the soft fur. "We stood, buddy," he murmured, "and they saw." He dressed slowly, the worn fabric of his jacket settling over his shoulders like a second skin. The small box with the metal sat on the table, the silver catching the pale light of morning. He didn't need to wear it, he didn't need to display it. The weight of it was already stitched into every breath he took. Outside, the snow had turned to slush, the world soft and bright beneath the winter sky. Marcus stepped out into the cold, Bear close at his side. The quiet rhythm of their footsteps a promise that he would keep moving forward, no matter what. The Veterans Center was quieter that day, the hush of respect in every glance, every nod from the men and women who had seen what he'd done. They didn't crowd him with questions or praise. They didn't need to. The way they stood when he entered, the quiet weight of their presence, was enough. Director Lang met him at the door, his smile warm but quiet. "You've reminded us all," he said softly, "that standing your ground isn't about shouting the loudest. It's about refusing to move when you know what's right." Marcus nodded, the truth of those words steady in his chest. "I didn't plan it," he said quietly. "I just couldn't let it stand." Lang's smile deepened. "And that's what makes it matter," he said. "The world needs more people who stand because they have to, not because they're told to." They shared a quiet moment, the hush of understanding between them a bond stronger than any metal. Bear nudged his leg, the gentle thump of his tail a steady drumbeat in the soft light of the morning. Marcus took a breath, the cold air clean in his lungs. He knew the world outside would keep turning, the noise, the shouts, the endless push to forget the quiet stands that built the bones of this country. But he also knew that what he had done would echo in ways he would never see, because some fights never end, some stands never fade. And some promises, the quiet ones, the steady ones, were the ones that changed everything. As he stepped back out into the winter morning, Bear at his side and the calm weight of the metal in his pocket, Marcus felt the quiet strength of every stand he had ever taken settle deep in his bones. He didn't know what tomorrow would bring, but he knew one thing. When it came, he would be ready, because no matter how loud the world tried to shout, he had already learned the quiet truth that would guide him through every storm. "I will not be moved, and I will never stand alone." Thank you for joining us on this journey. If this story moved you, if it reminded you that sometimes the quietest stands are the strongest, please subscribe to Endless Stories. Like and share this video because some voices refuse to be silenced, and some promises never fade.